Evening, welcome everyone. So it's a very weird time. I thought we would probably, as usual, it's not very usual because we do it on Friday. We're doing it on a Friday because I was going to be in London tomorrow if I could actually find my way there. I think it's finding my way out that'd be more difficult. That event has been cancelled, of course, because we've had, as someone pointed out actually this week, there are babies who have been born at the start of this week. They're just a few days old and they're already on their second Prime Minister and their second monarch. It is quite spectacular. I'm not sure, I suppose at some point something like that sort of must have happened, but I'm not sure it would have done. We'll go through a few comments, but I thought we could do is just open out some questions that people may have, because there'll be there are constitutional issues that people won't really understand. I saw a little thing, Max Robespierre, for example. I saw someone asking, when will the coronation be? And Max was thinking, probably in a couple of weeks or something. It'll be next year. The coronation doesn't happen anytime soon. Charles is king now. Charles was king the second his mother died. But, there's various processes which will be alien to a lot of people because most people were around for the last one. And even those who were around for the last one, most would have been too young to know what was going on anyway. We don't have the quick availability of information like we do now. But there'll also be other questions as well about, what the government does, what various things does. There's been some very strange things happening. I'll tell you two of the oddest things, totally unnecessary, but there's quite a few unnecessary ones. And this is going to be a dig at the government as well. So the Met Office gives us our weather forecast, right? They've said out of respect for the Queen, they're only going to do daily forecasts. How would it be disrespectful to the Queen to tell us what the weather's going to be like tomorrow? That is just... And there's another one as well. Football, almost all football on the island has been cancelled. I think there's some grassroots football in Scotland that's still going ahead this weekend. That's it. Everything else, the professional leagues, they're not playing. Why? They are for rugby and cricket. It would allow people to, show their support. I don't understand it. And the reason ultimately for this, and it absolutely amazed me, is because the government hasn't given any leadership. Obviously, you've got various organisations who are thinking, we don't want to offend people. And you can understand that. They're erring on the side of caution rather than suffer reputational loss for getting it wrong and having to U-turn. So they're just going, right, out of respect, we should just stop doing what we're doing. It's like, but you don't have to stop what you're doing. If doing a particular thing would be disrespectful, okay, you maybe think about it, So, for example, there's a group that campaigns for Britain to become a republic, say. They, out of respect, have just stopped campaigning for a few days. That's fine. That's the sort of thing. Anyway, so we'll go over... I've got a few extra thoughts to put in as well. But I just thought we could sort of discuss political implications, because there are a lot of them. But anyway, we'll go through some questions here. It says, to coin an old phrase, will this government see the recent passing of the Queen as a good day to bury bad news? They already have. I mean, I expected it. And you just to be clear that this isn't purely party political, you've used the phrase there, a good day to bury bad news. That was from the last Labour government. A Labour spin doctor, it wasn't Alistair Campbell, but a Labour spin doctor, as they were called then, when it was when Princess Diana died, wasn't it? Was it, or was it something else? I think it was and they basically said, because that's what governments do, and it's sort of expected when there's some massive distraction, and usually that distraction is a tragedy, you make a load of announcements. And I expected that, and I absolutely, although it's not good for the public, I wouldn't criticise the government for doing that now, because unfortunately it's just the way politics works. But what I object to is when they do the opposite. So for example, Liz Truss announced that she's lifting the moratorium on fracking. The Conservatives promised in their manifesto there would be no fracking. They're the ones who banned it, remember. They're the ones who banned it. They said, because it was deeply unpopular, there'd be no fracking unless there was incontrovertible evidence that it was safe, which there isn't, doesn't exist. So they were supposed to... Oh, it was the September 11th attacks. I see, sorry. I couldn't quite remember what it was. But it was, yeah, there was supposed to be... They were supposed to be publishing their evidence, which of course would be roundly savaged. Now they're not going to. They're not going to until after the official period of mourning, which goes on for some time. So we're not actually going to see this. So they've still lifted the moratorium, but they're not releasing the evidence, which will be roundly trashed. They'll be waiting to release it at a time when people have largely forgotten. So the fact that this presents a distraction for the government is one thing. Any politically savvy government is, of course, going to roll out their potentially embarrassing or unpopular announcements at this time. Okay. Withholding things though. So what they're doing at the moment is they're stopping some government business because they say, oh, just out of respect. But there's other government business going on. So for example, the Department for Culture is still accepting applications for like grants and things. That's still going on. They've been very clear saying, oh, no. You know, we'll still be on with that. We'll still do that. So why can some officials still carry on as normal and other officials are told you can leave those jobs? No. So they already are doing, and I find that disrespectful. But anyway, let's go through some more. So the idea is I'll say questions. I've got some thoughts of my own to sneak in as well, but let's have a look. And they're saying condolences to people who may be feeling sad about the Queen's passing yesterday. I'm a Republican, though I'm somewhat disheartened by it being the end of an era. I mean, I am a monarchist, but I'm not really into personalities. Like for me, the monarch and MPs and peers in the House of Lords, all of these people are servants, public servants, right? So as far as I'm concerned, they are all people and they are deserving of human empathy, but I'm quite weird anyway. I don't feel sad about people I don't know. You know, I feel sorry for the people who do feel sad, as Emma's expressing that, but it's got nothing to do with that. I'm not a Republican. On balance, I'm a monarchist, but that has nothing to do with it. You know, it's I'm not particularly sad, but it is momentous in a way that it isn't if a prime minister passes, even in office, which doesn't really happen. That even if that did happen, because they're more fleeting. This is someone who's been the Queen all my life. I swore an oath to the Queen at one point. But anyway, did Truss inadvertently reveal Charles III before Charles himself or Clarence House did? Very possibly. I wondered that. It is quite difficult though to tell these days, because the last time we had a new monarch, the flow of information was very carefully controlled, because it could be everything went through officials to the BBC and then out to the public, right? It was all controlled. You can't do that now because there are so many people reporting all at once. So you can't do that. The nearest we got to control yesterday was, it was quite clear that when the announcement was made that she died, she had been dead for some hours. I suspect they deliberately left the news until the evening when most people would have finished their normal day jobs, because I commented to my partner yesterday afternoon, it must have been about 4 or 5 o'clock, that it had been absolutely hours since we'd had an update. We had this thing coming out saying she's really ill, and straight away you think, oh, this is bad. You know, you sort of knew that this is it, this was it. But then there was no update. You know, there was no update. Even if the update was just, she's still comfortable, you know, we're doing everything we can type of thing. But we didn't get anything. So that told me that, you know, the time had actually come. And they were just holding on to the news until, you know, what they thought was a better time to announce it. But I did wonder about the Charles III thing, because I know, and I mentioned to someone a few years ago, I seem to remember him saying he might take the name George, be like George VII, because because of the unfortunate association with the first King Charles. But obviously he's decided that was a bit childish. There's nothing wrong and it's fine. But anyway, Vascuda there saying, I'm not fussed whether they have monarchy or not. Having PR and an elected second chamber is more desirable first. Yes, I certainly think. I mean, I was saying to someone on Twitter actually when they were supporting the idea of a republic, and I do think there will inevitably be more talk of republic. I don't necessarily think now is the time. I think if people try and talk about it now, they'll actually harm their own cause because they will come across as crass. The public, this is, you know, the reason why we've got all this in the media at the moment and all this in the news, it's not because of a handful of people capturing the news headlines. It's genuinely in tune with what the public would expect and would want. So it will come across as crass at the moment, but there will obviously be a discussion, and you know, it may well be a more realistic discussion. But yeah, I mean, I said to this fella, look, you know, at the end of the day, I was actually sarcastic about it. I think the way I phrased it was, yeah, because we're so good at electing heads of government, suitable heads of government, why not let us choose the head of state as well? Yeah, absolutely. We need to sort out the Parliament first, which at the end of the day is where political power resides. The Queen doesn't really have much in the way of political power. She shouldn't have any. She shouldn't really have any. That's the main criticism I have of the monarchy, that it shouldn't be. There's no need for any political power. But anyway, sad that Britain will be a patriarchy for the foreseeable future, at least in terms of the monarchy. Well, you say that, but of course, the real leader of the country is the Prime Minister, and that's a woman, sort of. But anyway, I did see someone joking though, you know, because the Tories and the right wing, particularly the far right wing, this is not the reasonable right wing, are all going on about, you know, trans issues, woman is a woman and all the rest of it. And someone had a joke and they said, oh, I can't believe it's come to this. Britain's going to make Charles the new Queen. But anyway, don't think it's happened before. Pretty sure the BBC said that when Truss visited Charles early for the weekly orders, it was the first time it was a new monarch and new PM at the same time. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. It's a very odd situation. And without appearing to be too irreverent, Boris Johnson will be absolutely kicking himself. I mean, this is, you know, and I know I don't believe he has any regard for it. I heard him, you know, make his speech, and everyone's going, "Oh, what a nice speech about Her Majesty." And it was like, well, first of all, it was mostly talking about himself. It was plugging himself. He wasn't talking about the Queen. I mean, you listen to Keir Starmer's, even Liz Truss's was better than Boris Johnson's, I thought. But anyway, Boris Johnson will be absolutely kicking himself that this couldn't have happened 2.5 months ago. Anyway, the cycling tour of Britain had the last 3 stages cancelled. Apparently the police were needed elsewhere. I suppose if it's a policing issue, that still seems a little bit odd. There's a few motorsport events going ahead this weekend as well, even one starting this evening on the World. I mean, there's no reason to stop things. You know, there's a reason sometimes you might amend something, or, you know, certain things like political campaigning. Yes, that's normal, because that is normal. That's established. That's normal at a time like this. But there's no need to stop things. What you're supposed to do, you've got to remember what this is. It's not so much about respect for the Queen, it's respect for the people. It's like with any death, it's about respect for the people left behind. The Queen doesn't care. She's off. She's shuffled off the mortal coil. It's the people's feelings who are left behind. And I don't really think the public wanted the football to be cancelled. And I'm quite sure the royal family didn't care one way or the other. So, okay, here's a good one, Craig. Charles has historically been quite politically active in terms of supporting what he thinks are good causes. Do I think him being monarch will make any practical difference now? Yes. He's even said relatively recently, I mean, they've been gearing up for this for a while. It was maybe last year, I think he said, that he would have to be more discreet as king. In fact, he even said it in his speech. He recorded a speech earlier today that was played at 6 o'clock. I don't know how many people have listened to that. It's quite a good one, actually. And he referenced that in there, that he's not going to be able to he can't campaign. He's not allowed. I think it was probably inadvisable anyway. Although, Keir Starmer's speech, it's worth listening to that if you get the chance, if you haven't already. You notice he was a bit cheeky in that one. People said it was absolutely brilliant speech, and I thought it was a very good speech. I thought there were a lot of very good speeches in the Commons today. I haven't heard all of them, but I've heard some good ones on both sides of the House. But Starmer slipped one in. So obviously this week, what would have been the big news this week if the Queen hadn't passed on, was energy. The government basically trashing all environmental standards, and making us pay for it. All right. And Keir Starmer referenced the fact that Charles was pushing climate change action long before it became mainstream. That he was championing environmental causes long before they became the political norm. And I think that was a not very subtle but sort of veiled attack on what the government are doing, making it clear that what the government are doing now is at odds with the public and the monarch. Anyway. Do I think there'll be more offered by the Tories than the energy bill loan? They'll do the bare minimum. They've already done the bare minimum. I mean, I was surprised they did as little as they did, in that the bills are still going up. And also the way the media are presenting it. But you come to expect this now. I noticed someone complaining, saying, that the bills are going to be capped at £2,500. No one's going to pay more than £2,500. No, you are. What they're saying is that the average energy usage will be £2,500. But a year and a half ago, it was £1,300. So it's nearly double. What they're saying is, we have basically, in the space of a year, doubled your energy bills. Give us a round of applause. And we're supposed to be grateful, because it could have been treble. And next year it could have been quintuple. 5 times as much next spring. So we're supposed to give a round of applause for that. But bear in mind, there was no need for it to... And I know there are supply issues, but nonetheless, the reason why these bills are going up is largely profit. It's largely profit. But in terms of what the Tories will offer, they will offer the bare minimum they can. So I can't predict, will they offer more, because that depends on how the public react. If the public seem to go along with it, that's it. If they think they can pare it down, they will. If the public say this isn't good enough, if they start suffering in the polls because Labour, which will now be more difficult. I mean, forget it at the moment. Forget Labour trying to land any big hits at the moment. I mean, I would have said forget it for a few weeks anyway. But I would now say we're back onto it being the new year before people regain their senses. But the if the public warm to Labour's plan, and Labour are very good at getting across them, look, our plan had these bills £600 lower, and you weren't going to pay for it in extra taxes, the Tories could suffer in the polls, and they may have to do more. But it'll be purely down to Liz Truss is only going to do what her MPs force her to do, and her MPs are only going to force her to do what their constituents are going to force them to do. So it depends on the people. Monarchs have different names for their eras, like Elizabethan, Victorian, etc. Charles is Carolean. Charlian would make more sense to me. I'm not an expert on these sort of things. I was wondering myself earlier this morning, what do we call this age? It may not be much of an age though, because, I mean, let's be honest, Elizabeth ascended to the throne as a fairly young woman, and Charles is like, what, 73? And he often does, I mean, you know, they live a healthy lifestyle. You know, they look after themselves. They obviously have the best medical care. But he doesn't always look particularly well to me. I mean, he has been well. He's not had illnesses, like serious illnesses. But, you know, I'm not sure he's going to last. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a few years. But he may not last more than 15 years. I mean, let's be honest here. So I don't know that we'd really call it much of an age. It's much like, you know, his grandfather, George VI. He didn't really reign for very long. Let's go for some others. Not a fan of unelected peers or heads of state. Don't like the public media grief outpouring. Never knew the Queen or a family. They may be nice. No time for discussion about it, I suspect. Well, you know, this is the time for a discussion of it. But as I say, the point I made in the video today is it's not about the Queen. The Queen doesn't mind. The Queen's gone. It's about everyone else. You know, this, and I always say we live in a society. See, I would be quite happy. I'm quite dispassionate about things because I didn't know her either. You know, I respected her. I thought she did do a good job as head of state. I thought she was a bit rubbish at families. I think that's why her family's so messed up. She was very bad at that. But, you know, as a monarch, she was very good. She was subtle, clever. She did her job well. I think a lot of people forget what her job is. Remember, what her job is being a super ambassador. She is someone who gives ministers good advice on how to approach other world leaders and officials, because she knows them all. That's the benefit of being trained pretty much from birth in diplomacy. There's no one else, you know, only a monarch has, even if Charles, something happened to him in the next 5 years, say, and William came to the throne then, even he, as a relatively young king, would still have way more experience and way more training than any other diplomat or ambassador. And I mean any other. You could have someone who's been a distinguished ambassador for decades, longer than William has been alive potentially, although there'll be very few of those, and they still wouldn't have had the intensity of experience and training that he's had. So, you know, you do lose that with the Republic. And I think people forget about that, because I think they forget what the deal is. I think people look at the pomp and pageantry, which is, you know, what sells the papers, and they think, oh, well, anyone could do that. But that's not their job. That's just the cultural baggage that goes with it. You know, there is a serious job behind it, which is why, as I say, and I did ask a person, so you know, someone was saying about, you know, some heads of state can just be appointed by Parliament, we could just do that. And I said, well, what's the point? What's the point? All you would then get is a less experienced functionary who does the same job as the Queen or the King, but not as well. But anyway, because they're not part of government. I mean, you know, when we talk about the fact in monarchy where it should be elected, they're not part of government. They're no part of government. There's three branches of government: legislature, judiciary, and executive. She's not part of any of them. She's an official. She's a titled official who lives a very nice life in a load of nice houses and can. But it's not like she can flit around and do what she wants either. She gets told to go here, there, and everywhere and meet this arsehole. And can you make friends with this bell end here because, you know, it's in our national interest. Anyway. I'm not from the UK, live in a republic, but I found the coverage quite intrusive in a way, almost gruesome. From lunchtime yesterday, as if news networks just waiting for the poor woman's demise. Well, they have been. Because the thing is, it's massive news. And it's fairly big news around the world. You know, we've seen some quite stunning tributes from world leaders. The Australian Prime Minister, the French President, the US President. And they're all going to be congregating on London in a couple of weeks for the service. There'll be the funeral, there'll be the service there'll be hundreds of world leaders there. Hundreds. You know, you just don't get that for like, you know, if a prominent head of government would die, not even in office, because usually you won't die in office as a head of government. So you might have a funeral and you might get some world leaders to go there, but this will be epic. This will be absolutely epic. I notice Vladimir Putin has said that he won't be attending, but he did send his condolences still. You know, Erdogan of Turkey has said that he'll be hoping to get there. There'll be absolutely ridiculous number of people coming. So it is big news. I get people... Well, I do and I don't. So when I understand that there are people that aren't interested in news. I haven't read any news stories about it. I know what's happened. You know, I've read the constitutional side of it. I've been reading papers and documents and so on to get myself up on everything. But I haven't been reading news articles on it. I don't need to. I've been following tributes. I've been following what people have said. That's it. Now, I would say I could totally understand people saying, look, this isn't interesting to me, but other news is still carrying on. I want to be told that other news. A few decades ago, I'd have had a lot of sympathy for that. But nowadays, it doesn't stop you. You know, if you want to find the latest economic news, it's still there. People are still writing articles on the latest economic news. You just go to the right section. All that's changed, really, is... If you're watching the television, okay, but I don't like television. Television for me is too bad. It's because you're a slave to it. It's passive. It doesn't do what you want it to do, right? So that's why I prefer the internet. But, you know, so if you watch telly, yeah, but don't watch telly then. Go to the internet and find what you want. You know, if you want the economic news, find that. If you health news, find that. The only difference is on the homepage of the news media outlets, it's all about the Queen. Well, in the British media outlets anyway. There's probably reasonably prominent on others as well. So yeah, I would say it doesn't have to be intrusive. I'm not going to get through all these questions, I'm afraid. It doesn't have to be intrusive. You can largely ignore it, but this is why, as I say, I think some things were a mistake. Cancelling football matches, I think, or postponing, I think was a mistake because there was no need for it. It wasn't disrespectful to hold them. On the contrary, it would have allowed football fans who wanted to express their affection for it, and for everyone else to just shut up. That would have been fine. Now they've been robbed of that. I mean, they could have had their first little sing-song of God Save the King if they wanted to. In you know, well, it's the national. It's actually a weird thing that the anthem. It's a bit unfortunate that it's also the English don't have their own national anthem, because then they can be a bit funny about it in other parts of Britain. But there you go. It is what it is. But there you go. Postal workers come off strike in respect. You're saying that, well, the rail strikes as well. That sort of thing again is fine. I mean, at the end of the day, the strike didn't need to be next week. There wasn't anything crucial about next week. They're just postponing it. The strikes are still going ahead. The action will still go ahead. The cause is still the same. The remedy will still be the same. The Trades Union Congress has been postponed. That's a bit more unfortunate, but again, I understand the reason why. Obviously, the march I was going to go on tomorrow has been postponed as well. That was a bit in the balance, actually. I think that was a bit in the balance, but most people seem to think it was appropriate to not go ahead with that. I will say I did say that I would still go if it was going to go ahead, because I'd committed to, but I don't think it would have had good optics. I can't help thinking that Johnson is livid that he's not PM right now. This might be unkind, but he paid tribute to her in the House of Commons. He couldn't even start the speech from making it all about him. Well, yeah, this is what I said earlier, isn't it? It was, you know, it was a very selfish speech. People say, "Oh, he's brilliant, he's brilliant." No, it wasn't. It was quite selfish. He also let something slip. He let slip that he was told that the Queen was on her last legs months ago. So, you know, they've put her through this unnecessarily long Tory leadership contest, knowing full well that she wasn't well, you know, but there you go. But anyway, You say you love the way Starmer trashed Truss, May, Cameron, Johnson and Kwarteng in the Commons all in one swoop yesterday. Started to look more presidential by the day. Yeah. I think Starmer has been working on his pitch. I think what he said was the sort of thing he would have said before summer. I think the way he's saying it now is more assured. I think there's been work on the way he's presenting. I think this is all to the good because Liz Truss is not charismatic. In fact, again, I don't want to pick on her when she, like, to be fair to Liz Truss, when she's gone up to that lectern and she had to make a statement as Prime Minister about the passing of Queen Elizabeth, that must be an incredibly stressful job to do. And I'm not going to attack her but at the same time, you heard her say what she said in the way she said it, and you just looked at it and you thought, she's not a good speaker. It's not her skill. And I wouldn't normally trash someone for doing that. I'm not going to do it on this occasion either. But just to note that for me, one of the big, and there weren't too many big ones, but one of the big drawbacks for me with Starmer was that lack of charisma. But it is always a choice. You say presidential. Obviously he's not a president. We don't have a presidential system. But people do often vote as if we did. People do vote for the leaders. You know, I vote for the party. Some people will vote for the candidates. Some people will vote for the leaders of the party. You know, which person do I want as Prime Minister? They don't really think about the party even. And Keir Starmer now, out of the two, between him and Liz Truss, is going to look like the more human. That's quite big. And it's also why, although yes, the Tories seem to have got themselves another distraction, I think in time I'm less worried about how Starmer's going to be able to present himself now. Edwardian age only lasted 9 years. Of course, there have been several Edwardian ages. I'm not sure which one you're talking about, because we've had quite a lot of them. We've had 8, haven't we? It's quite tricky. That's the other problem with talking about ages like this. When you talk about the Edwardian age, like which one? Or the Georgian age, which one? Even the Elizabethan, like if someone had said Elizabethan age to me before yesterday, I would have thought Elizabeth I, Tudor times. Well, the very end of the Tudor times. Whereas now Elizabethan age could include my lifetime. But you know. What will the next age be called? Getting worried. We have, I don't know. We haven't had too many Williams. I actually don't know. I'm not really a royal buff at all. Like, as I say, I describe myself as a monarchist for practical reasons, but I'm not a royalist. Like, I sometimes distinguish. I'm making terms up here, but you know, say I'm a monarchist because, from a practical point of view, a pragmatic point of view, I quite like the political system. But I'm not a royalist. I don't care about the celebrity side of it. I don't care about the pomp and pageantry. I don't care about it. Not interested. Troop in the colour, don't care. You know, it's and about the lives of the royal family, it's celebrity news. I don't give a monkeys. I don't follow it. So, but I don't even historically. So I don't know these things, unfortunately. I'm more interested in the constitutional side of things. Should the monarchy modernise itself in regards to not sending off all male offspring to the military? What's wrong with being a teacher, engineer, etc.? There is a practical reason for that. I think Charles, I think will want to change things. In fact, I know he will. He sees himself as a bit of a moderniser. I know he disagreed with his mother on a few things. So I think we can expect to see. In fact, you may have seen him when he was in the crowd earlier on. Like, Queen Elizabeth was she was of an age where you were very standoffish. You know, I don't think she was a cold person, but she was very standoffish. You know, very prim and proper. Charles is, I think, a little bit more consciously of the people. Like, he got in there, he was hugging and so on. You can't imagine the Queen doing that. But there is a practical reason for sending your male offspring. I mean, you could argue you should send all of them into the military, and it's because the eldest of them one day is going to lead the military. They're head of the military. So Charles is now the head of the British military. Of course he needed to have served. Now obviously you don't put the heir to the throne in jeopardy, so it'll be a fairly closeted existence, unlike the second in line. Like Prince Andrew and Prince Harry have both seen active service in war zones. You know, you sort of will risk a little bit your second born, but not the firstborn, because that makes a mess of everything. But there is a practical reason, and it is, as I say, and that's also why it's not just the first one, it can be the second, because bear in mind the Queen's father was not the eldest of of George V. He was the second eldest. He became king unexpectedly when his brother abdicated. So the similar thing can still happen, or accidents can happen, or whatever. So they do need military service. It could just be argued it should be all of them, the female as well as the male senior royals. If there's a credible chance that they could one day become the monarch, they should probably serve, because yeah, they are the head of the armed forces. They don't really give the orders. You know, it's the Secretary of Defence and the Prime Minister who effectively order them to go to war, but nonetheless they are very much involved in military life. So, you know, they need to know what they're talking about. As in other times of national crisis like war and pandemic, we've seen people rally around the government getting a boost in the polls. Will this lead to the Conservatives getting a boost? I honestly don't know. On this occasion we may not, because Labour are presenting themselves quite well. I'll tell you what I was worried about. I thought back to when Diana died. Now, Tony Blair gave his People's Princess speech, which I think was Alistair Campbell's, right? And knocked it out the park. William Hague gave a speech as well. He was leader of the opposition at the time, Tory leader. And his came across as dispassionate. And it was considered that massively hit William Hague's credibility with the public, that he got the pitch wrong. Now, I'm not going to say roles reversed here, because I don't think Liz Truss made a massive arse of it, but I think Keir Starmer did better, and it doesn't matter which one you think did better anyway. Keir Starmer did not mess it up. So there is every chance that the public will not play party politics over this, but who knows? People are funny, people are fickle. There isn't a general election on right now, so the polls can do very odd things. And I, to be honest, even without this, expected the polls to do funny things over the next few months anyway. It's really, I'll pay attention to them and I'll react to them, but really it's all about next year. 2023 I think is the make or break year for Labour. I don't actually anticipate them messing it up. You say they have the best lifestyle and medical care, but hang on, is caviar a good diet? George VI died of lung cancer from smoking. Yeah, but back then smoking wasn't seen as the, even though we knew it wasn't good for us, they weren't like told this thing will be the death of you, don't do it. When I say they look after themselves, I mean the current, the last few generations. The current generations have looked after themselves. Better medical knowledge. I mean, there was a time when, you know, you were recommended to smoke to help clear your airways. What would have happened if Margaret was older than Elizabeth? It wouldn't have been Elizabeth. Oh, yeah, no, wouldn't have been. Wouldn't have been Elizabeth. It would have been Queen Margaret. Do I expect the Labour Party conference to be postponed? I don't know. There's not been an announcement. I know that the TUC have postponed. I'm going to suggest probably not, because it was due. It is tricky. The timing is tricky. See, the problem is the Conservative Party conference won't have to be. It's perfectly fine for that to go ahead early October. Labour's is quite soon. It's a tricky one, because the problem is it's very difficult to postpone. People have already arranged travel, maybe time off work, arranged accommodation. It's and the TUC would have done the same thing. Now the TUC, because theirs was going to start this weekend, Sunday I think. So they sort of had to. Labour, I mean, the fact that there hasn't been an instant announcement means that they're going to wait and see. I don't necessarily think they should, but we'll just have to wait and see on that one, won't we? It's unfortunate timing that theirs is early-ish. What's my opinion on the Irish presidential system? It's the same as my opinion on any. I mean, the French one's slightly different because the president is effectively. There is a prime minister, but they are directly appointed by the president, and that's a very different system. I don't necessarily think it's a better system, but there is some good reason for the French presidential system. The Irish presidential system, I just ask, what's the point? What is the point of it? I know if you look at the last few Irish presidents, and you wouldn't say a bad word about any of them, but for my money, a head of state, right? If you've got a parliamentary democracy, as Ireland does as well as the UK, if you've got a parliamentary democracy, they're the ones who create the laws, and there's an executive forms from that parliament. They're the ones who drive government policy. So what does your head of state do? So our head of state simply acts as a functionary. They're a diplomat and people who pass these things into law as an official would. There's no say in the matter. Now, if you're going to elect a head of state to do basically those same roles, if they're elected, they should be able to say, if there's some bill put before them, no, this isn't right. So, for example, if we had an elected head of state with Brexit going on, and they were of a different political persuasion, they should reasonably have been able to say, this doesn't seem to have the support of the public anymore. I'm not going to pass this until you issue another referendum just to make sure. And that sounds brilliant. That sounds absolutely brilliant for that particular case. But then you ask yourself, what if, so there's a world of difference between, and this is why I think it'd be more like, if we had an elected head of state, we'd be more like America than Ireland, because they get into a mess all the time. When you've got the president is head of government and head of state, but you have a separate legislature, which can be a separate party controlling it. There's a world of difference between the president and the executive and the legislature being of the same party and being different parties. World of difference, and I just ask, what are they going to do? I've yet, I can understand the arguments for republic, and I'm not totally committed to monarchy. It's not like Brexit, or a Tory government. I won't lose sleep over it if we suddenly became a republic, right? I wouldn't feel that my national identity has been attacked or that my country's going down the pan, right? But I would query, what benefit are we going to get? I cannot think of anything that an elected head of state would do if we consider the rest of the UK political system. What is it that an elected head of state will do that the monarch can't? I can't think of anything. And I haven't seen anyone else say anything. I probably missed a few things out. Okay, Phil, what is a monarchist? Do I believe? Well, again, I'm making my own when I said monarchist and royalist. I distinguish them by saying, in my case, I say I'm a monarchist, meaning I'm in favour of it as a constitutional monarchy as a political system. Because as far as I'm concerned, You know, you can either have a hereditary one, which, yes, is harking back. It would no one would ever invent this system in a new country, would they? It's harking back to feudal times. Of course it is. But there is still advantages in it over an elected one. Elected head of state, like any elected politician, might be an idiot and they know nothing. They have no value. Whereas hereditary one might also be an idiot, but they've had training and duty rammed down their throats from the day they were born. Yes, they don't always behave as we think they should. We can certainly criticise them, but I can criticise our elected government. I can criticise ones that are elected in better societies, ones that have proportional representation, ones that have more transparency, for example. They still get things wrong. But I just don't understand I don't understand what it is about an elected head of state in our system. What can they do? How is it a better representation of the people? How does it help the people? You know, we would help the people a great deal more if we made sure that our parliament was representing the people. Anyway. If Charles is now king, why do we need a coronation which is going to cost the country huge? See, there are constitutional issues. Right? You can't just say someone's the king, right? Part of the reason for the coronation is, in my view, an anachronism, because the problem is that Charles, although I think there'll be some, was it Jamaica? Was one of them saying, actually, after Elizabeth, maybe we shouldn't have? To my mind, the monarch, the UK monarch, should not be the monarch of any other country. It's an absolute madness that Charles will sort of become the king of Australia and New Zealand and Canada and why? What? Why? That's it. See, that's what I mean about monarchists but not royalists. Like, I'm in favour of the system because it suits us. What does it doesn't do any of these other countries any good. They're republics. Who ever heard of a republic having a monarch as well? Like, that's the weirdest thing. Like, Australia is a republic, but it has a monarchy as well. It's functionally a republic. Madness. So, but anyway, the question there, John says, do you believe in a head of state you cannot remove? So assume upper house stuff with bumpkins also okay. PR must reform of Lords must last thing head of state. The thing is though, you say a head of state you cannot remove, a monarch you can remove. This is the thing, you see, the monarch cannot be political. If she, or now he, had tried ever being political, like people would sometimes say, well, why doesn't the Queen just block this legislation? It's clearly against the will of the people. Because then we wouldn't have a monarchy. That's part of the benefit of it, that you would instantly remove them. You know, in theory, yes, the monarch has the power to say, I'm not passing this law, it's stupid. That would be the end of the monarchy. Simple as that. That would be the end of it. So no, I'm not in favour of unelected peers because there's a fundamental difference. Peers in the House of Lords are allowed to be political. They're allowed to vote any way they please. They are voting on laws for this country. The Queen isn't. The King now isn't. They just pass them. They just sign some vellum. That's it. They get handed these things. Charles, right? We know he's an environmentalist. He is going to have to sign things into law that he knows are wrong, that are going to damage the environment unnecessarily. But he will do it because he's got to do it. Whereas your peers, they should be elected because they behave like politicians anyway. They are politicians. People who decide things should be elected. But the monarch doesn't decide things. I actually got onto the things I was going to bring up actually, but important to do the questions. Craig there, I'm curious with everything going on in the country, have I ever considered moving abroad? Work for a multinational, half a dozen of my friends, colleagues have now left Europe. No, for multiple reasons. Right now I'm in a relationship which will hopefully last forever. Yeah, we're getting ourselves stuff, so it will last forever. And so obviously I can't move anywhere. I did say a quite recently, earlier this year, that in all seriousness, had I still been single, see, I think towards the end of last year I did say, had I still been single, I might have moved to Scotland, because no ties anywhere. I would have just moved to Scotland. And then earlier this year I thought to myself, that might not be far enough from this Tory government. Maybe I should move to Ireland, but I am single, so I won't even be moving up the road, right? But if I were single, would I move abroad as such? I'm a bit of a homeboy. I don't like, not in the American sense, I don't like traveling at all. I don't like going places. See, quite a few years ago, someone tried to get me interested in teaching in the Middle East. I wouldn't have liked it, because I understand, like people, for example, a lot of people in this country emigrate to Australia, and a fair chunk of them come back quite quickly, because they just look at it and think, oh, Australians, nice laid back, down to earth people, Barbies on the beach at Christmas, brilliant. And they look, it's the grass is always greener, isn't it? They think about all the great things about it, and they forget that you take your life into your hands when you go to the toilet. They forget everything that twitches, wants to kill you, and is capable of killing you. It's too hot. They're probably insufferable whenever the cricket's on. So there's things that make him come back. Whereas I am aware there are things about my country that I would miss very badly. I would miss fish and chips. I would miss cheap Warhammer, or relatively cheap, and so on. So I would never have really considered moving abroad. Ireland is technically abroad, but it's culturally very similar and English speaking, so it doesn't quite feel the same thing. When you're in Europe and in an English speaking country, you do sort of think of abroad as being different language, very different culture, and all the rest of it, and so on. Have I seen the Michael Sheen speech? Yes, I did. Labour should get him in to coach how to give a speech. Yeah, if Keir Starmer tries to put on a Welsh accent, people will think he's taking the piss. In reality, as I said, Keir Starmer clearly has been taking lessons. I think it's quite clear. I mean, Michael Sheen's an actor. At the end of the day, there'll be loads of people who could do what he did. I did watch it. There'll be loads of people who could do that. I mean, you could get Brian Blessed. Any actor worth their salt, of course, can do a rousing speech, because that's what their job is. Things like that are the proper thespians, of course, are well trained in it. But Starmer, as I say, has clearly been developing that this summer, and he may continue to develop it. So I'm quite confident in that now. If the monarch doesn't decide things, there's no point in having them. Yes, there is, because as I already said, what they are diplomats. People misunderstand what the role of the monarch is. The role of the monarchy is diplomacy. Diplomacy is incredibly important. The power of a country, can stem from its economic activities, but ultimately it needs diplomacy. Like China has a reasonable amount of economic might, but it doesn't have that same diplomatic skill. And Britain doesn't have enough economic might these days. It punches above its weight, or has done until recently, because of diplomacy. That is the function, and it is a function that cannot be replaced by electing some random bod every few years who's had no training, no experience. That's what's pointless to me. You do need a head of state. Now, as America, as I say, they have the head of government and head of state in the same person. I don't see the point in that. What's the point in that? There is a fundamental difference between head of government and head of state. They're not twin emperors. They're not two people that counter each other. They have very different roles. And unfortunately, a lot of people think because the head of state has a constitutional element to it. Oh, God. Ooh. You say this is the first time you simply don't agree with me. Good. You should never always agree with someone. Never. You need to think for yourself. Yorkshiremen think travelling to Scunthorpe is going abroad. Well, I did. I lived in Scunthorpe. I mean, I feel like, do you know what? I feel, and I keep feeling like an outsider all the time. When I grew up in Yorkshire, but I went to Grimsby, which is only down the road, and the cultural differences were immense. I pissed off so many people, because they just can't deal with people who are just plain speaking. Even like language. My partner, who grew up in Gainsborough, says project, whereas I say project, just down the road. No distance at all between where we grew up. I say project, she says project. And that's why whenever people try and tell me you're not pronouncing that word correctly, I just like, honestly, my brain just goes, are they for real? People who were born and raised 20 miles away from me pronounce words differently to I do. There's a lot of different pronunciations around this country. The idea of being told by someone you're not pronouncing that correctly is absolutely maddening to me. But anyway. You say the monarch is apolitical, so can't be a diplomat. No, diplomats have to be apolitical. Always. Otherwise, where's the diplomacy? Diplomats cannot be partisan. They can't be. They're intermediaries. It's not diplomacy if they interfere behind the scenes. No, which is why there shouldn't be. They shouldn't be the monarch of Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere else. Because you're quite right about that. I'm not saying that the system all works perfectly. What I'm saying is constitutional monarchy is a better system than republic, for the system we have in the UK at least. But that doesn't mean to say that everything works perfectly. Like I said earlier on, the Queen should not interfere in anything, and occasionally is allowed to. Occasionally is allowed to raise issues on a personal level, which she shouldn't. Or now the King shouldn't. I keep forgetting we've got a king now. But that's not, you don't trash the system just because it's not working. Our parliamentary democracy isn't working, and it hasn't been working for many years. That's not a reason to get rid of it. It's a reason to reform it. You change some things, you go, well, what's the problem? The problem is that we have people elected by maybe 40% of the voters who have 100% of the power. Right, how do we change that? Proportional representation. Right, do that. That's what you do. That's how you deal with it. You reform the system. You identify the problem. You work out some solutions. You apply the solution that won't create more problems and will solve the problem. It's simple. You don't have to look to another country and go, well, everyone else is doing this, why don't we? Because different countries have different cultures. It's the same thing like, slightly off on a tangent, when America try and instigate regime change in the Middle East and try to go into Iraq. Oh, they need democracy. Oh, we'll install democracy. That didn't work. Why? Because they weren't culturally ready for it. They weren't ready for it. So it doesn't work. Do I think Charles will have Mogg shut up in the tower for lying to his mother? No. He's not allowed. They're not allowed. We've had a constitutional monarch. So, well, it's sort of from Charles II down. I mean, he was a bit, weird. But, generally speaking, it's been largely constitutional since then. It's sort of, I don't really know who was the first proper constitutional monarch. Again, I'm not up on my kings and queens history. But anyway, I'll just try and go through if any last little ones. You say, you question my ideas on monarchy. I'm welcome in Scotland. It's much better. Is it? Is it? Because when I said, if you're sort of English or Welsh, because technically it's the English and Welsh cricket team we have, and the Test match is on, or the Ashes is on, I can imagine being Australia is a fairly is a good time to not go out. Is it any different when there's a World Cup on? If you're in Scotland, if you're English? Would I alter the current GCSE grading system of numbers without nuance? The thing is, they already changed the system. They didn't need to change the grade system. Everyone knew where they were with the grade system. There was nothing wrong with reforming GCSEs. GCSEs are shit, and they've always been shit. The whole system's shit. They got rid of O levels for no good reason. It was a GCSE, and I had to do GCSEs. I was one of the first years to do them. I think I was the third or something. Ridiculous system. It didn't prepare you for A levels. It didn't prepare you for the world of work. They're rubbish. So they do need reforming, but it's not the grade system that was the problem. But that was a weird one just to throw in at the end. It could be argued that, especially since we're politically weak internationally post-Brexit, the monarchy with its history is what allows the UK to punch above its weight. I don't think it's necessarily the history. Again, heads of other governments, if they are impressed by the pomp and pageantry, they've got no business being heads of government, because they need to serve the interests of their own country, right? It has to be a practical level. But the idea of having an institution that has the lowdown on every culture in the world, because they've been there, they've studied it, the movers and shakers in the world, they can give the Prime Minister, oh, you're going to meet this president for the first time in your life, right, let me tell you about them, let me tell you what they like, let me tell you how to get on their good side, right, let me tell you what not to do, let me tell you what food not to give them, or what food they really like, you know, and that's invaluable. But anyway, there it is. You say Scotland has Lecky NHS, a police force and a fire brigade. Seems to be something ex-brother-in-law was concerned about. Yeah, it's certainly more functional, but there is still hope for the rest of us. Ultimately, these issues are down to government, aren't they? Governments are fleeting. Governments are fleeting. Am I in favour of 11 plus in grammar schools? No. I'm in favour of comprehensive education, but it should be effective comprehensive education. It should give everyone the opportunities to do whatever they would be willing and able to do. It should, for example, include lessons that all people need, like on politics, budgeting, banking, how gas and electricity and basic utilities work, critical thinking. You know, the subjects where you don't need qualifications in it, but you should learn them. Because the qualifications are useless anyway. Utterly useless. You know, people, it's not even years later, people get even decent grades at if they were clever and reasonably hardworking, they get good grades at GCSE, and never mind years later, 6 months later, they've forgotten it all. Because it's just ramming you with facts without enough time to fully understand them. It's you know, like they say, you know, most governments really fundamentally just want the people to be just about smart enough to operate the machinery of production, of industry, and not smart enough to question the people making the decisions. And that's, you know, Tony Benn was one for saying that, but there's been lots of people who've said the same thing. George Carlin in America said the same thing, didn't he? I don't quite know who it originates from, but you know, it's the conclusion you naturally draw when you grow up in any country that frequently produces right-wing governments, and our education system reflects it. You know, education, as far as the Conservatives certainly are concerned, is just a place to keep the kids from stopping the parents going to work and being economically active. It's a big old daycare centre where you need to teach them to read and write and do a few basic skills so that you're fit for a life of drudgery in the workplace. That's what it is. And I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher who tried to rail against it and failed spectacularly when I was in schools. I could never get on in schools. Colleges, different matter. Colleges, you've got a lot more, with post-16 education, there's a lot more leeway For teaching, there's none at all in schools. You get no opportunity to really teach in schools. But anyway, what if the monarchy is wrong on their advice? Not everyone will be as astute as Elizabeth II. They're much less likely to be wrong, though. And also, you know, they're very unlikely. It's like certain skills, things that look really impressive. You practice them enough, you get good at them. And people go, wow, this is brilliant. You know, it's a skill. And you practice it enough and you will be good at it. I mean, I can't really remember. And yet, you know, you sort of want a monarch who's got some intelligence as well. It would not be a great sign if we had someone who was a bit thick. So we'll just have to keep hoping. But anyway, we'll have to sort of leave it there. Run out of time on that one. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. We'll be back on to Saturdays from next week, so in 8 days' time. Where we'll be back onto normal politics as well, I hope. But yes, have a good evening, everyone. I'll be back on the normal schedule tomorrow. As I say, I'll probably do a couple of videos that I might not have ordinarily done, but they've sort of been planned anyway. And then back on Sunday, it'll just be normal on this channel after that. But yeah, have a good evening. Until next time, see you later.